Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marcia Butler, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I need to do a bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenter will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. If we can't get to your question during today's event, we'll make sure that someone reaches out to you afterwards. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Will Smith is the owner of Innovative Financial Solutions, which provides holistic financial planning focused on helping clients identify, clarify, and simplify the process of achieving their life goals and that which is important to them through intentional engagement, systematic implementation, and results-focused planning of their financial resources. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you, Will. Really excited to have you here.
Well, thank you, Marcia. I'm excited to be here as well. And I welcome everyone to today's webinar. And I hope that it is fruitful for you and that you will get something out of it that you can take back and help make your situation better. So today, what we really want to address is understanding money and how our mentality plays a role in our financial success. So the question is, what is money? If you're like me, you've probably heard a number of these things over your lifetime, and you may even have some other things that you consider money to be or that you have heard money to be. But the real question is, what is it really? In reality, money is simply a resource. It's not necessarily a medium of exchange. That's what it's used for. It's not a tool per se, just a tool, should I say, but that's something that it can be used for. So all of those terms that you saw initially on the first slide are things that money can be used for, but when you really want to understand what it is, at its roots, it is a resource. And as you can see here, the definition of a resource, but ultimately, a resource is something that we use to help us to function in life and to help us to accomplish the different things that we want to accomplish in life. And when you really look at it for what it is, and you actually, look at where the rubber meets the road, money is the resource, the primary resource that we use to protect and preserve our quality of life. I hear people say, well, everybody needs money. Well, that's kind of true and it's kind of not true. For an example, as a parent, I have children. Those children, they're in school, they're, doing different things throughout their life. They don't necessarily need money. What they need is somebody who can provide the necessary things that are required in order for their life to be sustained. So they themselves don't necessarily need money. I actually have a uncle and an aunt. Well, my aunt hasn't worked in years. My uncle works. So whenever she needs something, she says, honey, I need. And he provides her with what she needs in order to take care of those particular things. So while yes, money is an important resource and it is a resource that is required to do things in life, everybody does not necessarily need money. So
Well,
it's,
most of us don't have that luxury, so
yeah,
that makes
most of us don't have
that.
that luxury, right? Most of us don't have that luxury, but it's just important to understand that from the perspective of putting it in its proper place. So once we understand that, then we realize that the main objectives of money are to help us to meet our needs, to satisfy our wants, and to help us to meet the needs of others. And if we understand that, then it makes it easier for us to prioritize it. And that's where we get in trouble oftentimes in life because we don't prioritize it. So the question is, why do so many people get into financial trouble? Now, you all may have some ideas. As a matter of fact, this is a good opportunity for you to put some of those ideas in the chat box, and we'll read them and look at them once they come through. But just think about it for a second. Why do so many people get into financial trouble? This is true for people who are very wealthy. This is true for people who are very poor. And this is true for people who are in the middle. Why do so many people get into financial trouble? Okay, I see one response here says that people spend more than they make. Well, that absolutely is true. People spend more money than they make. Now, when you think about it, it's kind of like, how do you spend more money than you make? Well, they created things called credit. And because of credit, it allows us to spend money that we don't yet have. I saw another response about understanding the difference between wants and the needs. That's excellent. I saw one about not budgeting their money. All of those are excellent reasons as to why people get into trouble. But let's go to the source of why those things happen. Because while those things are true, there is something that causes people to do those things. And what is that particular thing? It is an improper mindset. It is an improper mindset that causes us to spend more money than we make. It's an improper mindset that causes us not to budget. It's an improper mindset that causes us to make poor choices. It causes us to do things that put us in a position to expose us to financial troubles, right? We can see some of the things we listed on here, not able to accurately determine their income. I can tell you that over the course of being a financial professional and doing financial coaching, this goes back to really 2010 when I started doing financial coaching. I've done countless numbers of seminars, and I always ask the question to people to tell me how they determine what their income is. And what I can tell you is that I have only had one person in 10 plus years at these seminars who was able to accurately identify what their income is, because most of us have not been taught how to identify what our income is. But that's one of the problems in terms of our mindset.
Can
Of
you
course,
give an, I'm sorry, can you give an example of of what you mean? Is it that people are just saying what their gross pay is, or what are
Yeah.
you talking?
So let's give you an example of this. All
Yeah.
right. So let's say a person has an employment arrangement where they bring in, let's pick an easy number so that the math is easy. Okay. They bring in $120,000 a year. So that's $10,000 a month. Well, that's not how much they're actually receiving, because there are taxes. There are state taxes and there are federal taxes. So right off the bat, they're not getting $120,000 a year in their hand. But if you ask a person who has a $120,000 salary what their income is, oftentimes they will tell you $120,000. But that's not a reflection of their actual income. Why? Okay, we talked about the taxes. Well, if they have a mortgage, and let's say that mortgage is $2,000 a month, well, that's $24,000 a year that they have signed a promissory note to the mortgager, which means that money doesn't belong to them. And the mortgager didn't give a condition of whether or not you were working or not as to whether you had to pay that money. Therefore, legally, that $2,000 that your employer is paying you doesn't even belong to you. It belongs to the person that you signed a promissory note for. So now we knock $24,000 off of that 120 in addition to the state and federal, but then you have utilities, you have groceries, which you have to eat. If you don't eat, you'll die. So that's an obligation that you have to spend money on, right? And there are a number of other things. And so when you start boiling this down, the amount of money that a person has actually coming in is not $120,000, but when they make decisions, they go to buy a car. The car dealer is going to ask them, well, what's your income? They're going to say $120,000. Then they're going to go to the furniture store. They want to buy some furniture. The furniture store is going to ask them, what's your income? They're going to still say $120,000. Yet they have committed significant portions of that $120,000 that's no longer available to spend on something else. So if you don't exercise that process of drilling down to what you actually have left over, and what I call income, it is the discretionary amount of money that comes into your possession that does not have to go back out. If it has to go back out, it's not coming in, it's passing through. Because you are now a steward of the resources that are coming into your possession to make sure that the people that you have made commitments to for that money, for whatever services that you want to receive, whether that's a car, utilities, cable television, cell phone, Bally's membership, XM radio, Hulu, right? Amazon, all of these things that you want to enjoy, they cost money. And that money that you've committed to those services now belongs to those particular institutions that you've agreed to. So that money's not yours anymore. And therefore, it can't be considered income. And most people do not think this way. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's really helps
better
clarify things. And I guess that goes right to changing your mindset around money.
Absolutely. That's exactly the reason why. But if we keep going to the next slide, you'll see that in addition to these things here, we also have to understand that the correct attitude about money is that it doesn't make us important. We live in a society where we revere people who are wealthy, not necessarily because they are knowledgeable, not because they have integrity, not because they are. I'll give you an example. I heard a person on the radio talk about how a celebrity this was a male person, how the celebrity has been instrumental in helping them to raise their son. They had never met the celebrity in person, okay? The celebrity had never met their son in person. Yet, because this person is on the radio, they ascribed to them, and they were famous, a very famous person. If I said the name, everyone would know the person, okay? Well, when you actually look at this individual celebrity's life, they were married and divorced 3 times. They have children by 4 different women. So when I reflect on that, is that the example that I want my son to follow? Now, that's my personal position, but the point that I'm making is the person who regarded this celebrity as a person who was instrumental in helping them to raise their son, his own personal life was not necessarily the example that we strive for in life. I don't think that anybody would raise their children and say, hey, I hope that you have 3 different marriages and three different divorces and have children out of wedlock like this person. I don't think that that's the example that we would lay out for our children. And that's not to say that a person can't correct their mistakes, not to say that a person can't, evolve and become a very good example. But the point that I'm making is that this individual who said that didn't know this person personally to know whether or not that's true or not. And the only reason why they were listening to this person is because they were a celebrity. And that's because they have money. And we as a society do that a lot. But money doesn't equal importance. Lack of money doesn't mean that you're not important. I did a seminar several years ago on finances. I did it at a church. There was about 40 some odd people that showed up at this seminar. It was an all-day seminar. I was a friend of the church. I had done many things with them, and the pastor had asked me to do this for the entire church because I had been doing it for the men's ministry. I happen to be very familiar with this ministry. They have over 1,500 members. And I happen to know that they have done events where hundreds of members have attended, entertainment type events. 40 some odd people showed up at this financial seminar. Had they invited a celebrity to come in and do financial literacy training, which I was doing, the place where they held the seminar would not have been big enough to hold it in, because people would have packed out to see the celebrity. Now, that celebrity in all likelihood would not have been a financial professional who was licensed and trained to give financial advice. Yet, that person would have generated a bigger audience than I did. Why? Not because they know more than me, not because their information is more valuable than me, simply because they are wealthy. And that is a mentality that is unfortunately reinforced in the society that we live in. So the correct attitude really to have about money is that those things don't really matter. At the end of the day, the correct attitude to have about money is what we said earlier, is that it's a resource. And it is a resource that is intended to protect and preserve our quality of life. And once we understand that, then we'll actually learn how to make better decisions with it. We'll learn how to be better investors. We'll learn how to be better stewards. We'll learn how to do things with our money that will be able to better position us to be able to do the things that we want to be able to do for ourselves and our families in the future. We can go to the next slide. So here's a simple fact. People who think that a lack of money is their problem can have, and often do have, continuous increases in their pay, and yet they continue to have the same financial struggles year after year. I met with a couple, and this couple came to me and they said, hey, Mr. Smith, we really need some help with our finances. I said, okay, well, kind of tell me what the problem is. They said, well, we feel like no matter what happens, we're always just getting by. I said, okay, well, how long, have you felt like this? They said, well, as long as we've been married. Well, how long you been married? I've been married 20 years. Wow, that's a long time for you to feel like you're always struggling financially. I said, so let me ask you a question. I said, are you earning more money now than you did 5, 10 years ago? It's like, oh yeah, sure. They said, in a matter of fact, we both retired from the military. And when we got married, we only earned about $60,000 a year together. Fast forward, they when they came to me, they were earning over $200,000 together. So I asked the question. I said, so you went from 60,000 to over 200, it's about 220,000 to be exact. I said you went from 60 to about 220. So from 60 to 120 is a double. And then from 120 to 220 is almost a double again. So your income has almost doubled 2 times over, yet you're still getting by. I said, doesn't that sound strange to you? She's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, how is it that just coincidentally that the amount of your expenses every year always increase at the rate of your increase in revenue? Doesn't that sound kind of strange to you? And they still had a hard time understanding what I was saying to them. And so ultimately, what I said to them is this: you all have a thinking pattern related to money that causes you to put yourself in the same position year after year after year, even though your pay increases. And that is, you're never learning how to live below your means. So every time you get an increase in pay, you increase your spending. And if we never learn how to be wise managers of our money, no matter how much your pay increases, your financial struggles will continue. And that's true for anybody and everybody. So it doesn't matter how much money we bring in or generate if we don't understand how to properly manage that money, how to think correctly about that money, how to prioritize what we're doing with our money, then we will always have these problems. And that's why you hear stories about athletes and celebrities and lottery winners and people who come into mega amounts of money, yet still somehow, some way, they find a way to get themselves into financial peril. And there are countless numbers of stories of people who are celebrities who had to file bankruptcy. There's countless numbers of stories of people who hit the lottery for millions of dollars, and then you hear about their story 8, 10 years later, and they're worse off financially than they were before they hit the lottery. Well, how does that happen? Mindset. And so you see here, anywhere from 44 to 70% of people who win the lotteries are worse off financially 5 to 10 years after winning the lottery. And again, that's a byproduct of bad choices. It's a byproduct of not managing the finances correctly. It's a byproduct of not prioritizing what they do with their money. And it's a byproduct of what they think about money. There are people, and I know this happened to me when I was in the military. I ended up getting an early separation. And just to put this in perspective, when I joined the military, I earned about $700 a month. Now, that was a sufficient amount of money because I had uniforms to wear every day to work. I had a place to eat every day where I didn't have to pay for. I had a place to sleep that I had to have to pay for. I had fitness facilities available to me to exercise and work out. And I had a host of other resources available to me via the military so that it didn't require a lot of money for me to function and live. Well, when I got out of the military, I didn't retire. I was still only making about $1,300 to $1,400 a month. So not a lot of money. So this goes back to the 80s and 90s. But when I got out of the military, I got a lump sum amount of money of nearly $20,000. I had never had that much money at one time in my life. And in my mind, that money would last, maybe not forever, but a long time. But I didn't have the right mindset about money. That's why I know this, and that's why I'm teaching this, is because I've lived this personally. In less than 12 months, that $20,000 was gone. Why? Because in my mind, that amount of money is so much that there's no way I could go through it in that period of time. And that's what people think who win the lottery. They think there's no way I could go through all this money. Well, by the time friends and family hit you up because they have, dire situations where you now have an obligation to help them and they're going to make you feel guilty, those pressures cause people to get into trouble. It causes people to make bad decisions. It causes people to do things that they otherwise would not do if they weren't in that situation. And, my attitude about money is this. If I work and you work, if you did not exercise good stewardship over your money to pay your responsibilities, why should I give you my money to pay your responsibilities? Now, if you fall on hard times, if you have some unfortunate situation that happened, then there's exceptions to every rule. But that's not the norm. Most of the time, when people are constantly asking others to help them, it's because they constantly make bad decisions. And this is a mindset problem when we're talking about money. Okay. So at the end of the day, we have been taught to believe in the general society that money and prosperity are synonymous. Well, I don't happen to believe that that's true. I can think of a lot of people who are public figures who've had a lot of money, but you probably wouldn't consider them prosperous. Okay. Like, first person that comes to my mind is a person like Bernie Madoff. Do you consider Bernie Madoff to be a prosperous person? Okay. Sure, he had a lot of money, but the money wasn't even his. He swindled, connived, and manipulated people out of his money, out of their money, should I say. Now, until the law exposed that, the general public didn't know that. So we were all operating under the perception that what he had was legitimate. But this goes back to what I said in the previous slide. You can't look at a celebrity or a wealthy person and just assume that they are credible because they're wealthy, because you don't know if they're legitimate or not, if they achieve what they achieve on a legitimate basis or not. And we can think of many different situations, not just Bernie Madoff, but we can think of many different situations where people were perceived to be something. And then once you peel back the onion, you realize, wow, this person isn't as great as it was made out to seem, made out to be. And so when we talk about prosperity, I'm really talking about things that transcend money. Yes, money is included in being prosperous, but money by itself does not define prosperity. Because to me, a prosperous person has peace. To me, a prosperous person has great relationships with their friends, with their family. There are people who make a difference in their communities and in their environments. There are people who have integrity. There are people who are dependable. Okay. There are people who are generous. They're not selfish people who are consumed with their own self-interest. Right. So when I think about prosperity, there's a lot that goes into this aside from the dollars and the material possessions that people have. Oftentimes, they may even be, there's a lot of people who are perceived to be wealthy that are steeped in debt. And when you subtract their debt from their perceived wealth, they're actually not doing much better than the average person. So these are all things that it just causes a paradigm shift in our thinking. Because at the end of the day, money is a great thing to have. And I like the way Zig Ziglar used to say it. He says, money's not everything. He says, but when it comes right down to it, it's better to have it than to not have it. And I agree with that. But I think that having it with the right perspective is even more important. So let's go to the next slide. So here it is. Financial independence is more important than being wealthy and rich. Because if you travel to countries like South America, Cambodia, some of the Middle East countries, places, Dominican Republic, other places around the world, you're wealthy already. And as a matter of fact, if you travel and you travel out of the country, a lot of times travel agents and people who coordinate these travels will talk to you about ways to safeguard and protect yourself from the community or the environment that you're in, because they prey on Americans, because they feel like we're all rich, that we all have money. And so that's because compared to them, we do. So it's not a proper mindset to want to be rich and wealthy. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but rich and wealthy is a perception more than it is an actual state of security. Okay. So a better position to be in is financial independence. So what is financial independence? Financial independence is when you have the ability, and I have the ability, to sustain my and our quality of life, to be able to endure the unexpected and unplanned crisis of life, and to be able to continue to meet our financial obligations without dependence on a job or help from others. That's financial independence. Okay. Again, I'll give you an example. I know a couple. They were not rich by the standards of what we consider to be rich, but they had did pretty well for themselves, and they owned several investment properties, real estate that they had accumulated over the years. And the tenants from those properties were generating, obviously, the revenue for them. And that passive revenue sustained their quality of life in a way that allowed them to pay medical bills. It allowed them to travel and take trips. It allowed them to do things for their family. It allowed them to weather economic downturns like recessions and things of that nature. And it allowed them to do that in a way where they were not dependent upon help from others or even Social Security for that matter. Okay. Again, that's financial independence. Yet they were probably only millionaires on paper as it relates to the value of their assets, because they had multiple properties. So those properties on paper were worth more than $1 million. But in terms of liquid assets and cash, they weren't millionaires in that sense. They just were able to carve out for themselves and under a situation where they understood how to be able to sustain their life. Okay. Being wealthy and rich, again, based on the society that we live in, is just a situation where people have a high earning salaries. They may have, $2.3 million home. They may drive around in luxury vehicles and what have you. But when you look at the mortgage that's on that home, when you look at the debt that's due on those cars, when you look at some of the other liabilities that they have, and you subtract out that from what their perceived wealth is, they may be worth $200,000-300,000. And by no stretch of the imagination is that the definition of what we consider to be rich. So it's just changing your perspective. And at the end of the day, if you are in a position of being financially independent, you may be wealthy or rich, but that's secondary to the main factor that you're able to be in position to take care of yourself, your family, and the things that are important to you, regardless of whether or not there's some other resource available to help you. That's a better position to be in. Okay. Now, we live in the United States of America, and it is considered to be the wealthiest country in the world. Yet, in the wealthiest country in the world, 2 out of every 10 people who enter the workforce at the age of 25 will retire financially independent. As a matter of fact, let me break this down for you in a little bit more clearer way. For every 100 people who start working at the age of 25, by the time they reach 65, this is the approximate results. One of those people will end up wealthy. 1 out of 100. Wealthy, I'm talking about the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musk, the Oprah Winfrey's, the Bill Gates of the world. Okay, that's wealthy I'm talking about. Okay, 19 of those 100 people will be financially independent. People like the couple that I just told you about who had the investment properties. Okay, now some of those financially independent may be millionaires, but 19 of them are financially independent. They're not the super wealthy rich. Okay. Unfortunately, 19 of those people actually didn't make it to 65. They passed away. So out of the 100, only 81 actually lived to reach 65. Of those 81, only 20 are either wealthy or financially independent. That means there's 61 people, really not out of 100, because only 81 made it to 65. So 61 out of 81 people are not financially independent, and 15 of those people are actually in poverty. In the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the world, 61 out of 81 people at 65 are dependent on Social Security and or friends, family, Catholic charity, Medicaid, state programs, and things of that nature, just to get by every day. Why does that happen? It happens because people don't plan, prioritize, and have the right mindset about money. Because most people, in reality, will earn enough money to be in a financially independent situation if they did the right things with it. And that really is the bottom line. But in order to do the right things with it, we have to have the right mindset. Success or failure in life is a byproduct of our choices. I teach a behavior modification program for students, and those students range from middle school to high school students. And the program is called Life Decisions 101. And the motto or the theme for this program is, in order to be successful in life, we must learn how to make good choices. We're not born knowing how to make good choices. So we have to learn how to make good choices. Well, that's true with finances. We have to learn how to make good choices financially. We have to learn how money works. We have to learn about investments. Like, one of the things that I say in my seminars is that money is a product. And most of us don't think about that. So let me give you 2 quick examples. When you go to buy a car, if the car costs $30,000, Do you have $30,000 to give to the car company? If you do not, then guess what you're doing? You're buying money. You're not buying the car. How do you know you're buying money? Very simple. The car costs $30,000. Again, I'm just using a generic example. The car costs $30,000. However, what you paid for was $40,000 or $35,000 because you paid the financial institution $35,000. Well, what did you pay for? You paid for the $30,000 that they gave to the car company for the car. So you paid $5,000 for the $30,000 to get the car. Because if all you would have paid them is the $30,000, then the money wouldn't have cost you anything. You would have only paid for the car. But the fact that you actually paid the $35,000, and in some cases more than that, depending on what kind of interest rate you get. Right. The fact that you paid more than that, my first interest rate when I bought my first car was 16%. 15, 6, something crazy. I don't remember. And I was just so excited to get the car. It was my first car. I never even thought about the interest rate. Matter of fact, to me, I thought, oh, 16, that's a low number. I was just dumb. Okay. But the reality is money is a product. And we buy money. Matter of fact, money is probably one of the most bought and sold products out there. Let's talk about life insurance. If you buy a life insurance policy, you're buying money. Why? You take out a $250,000 policy. Do you have $250,000? Probably not. So you're paying the life insurance company money. And if you buy a term policy, this is how we know that you're buying money. If you buy a term policy and you are fortunate enough to actually die before the policy ends, you pay your $100 a month to the insurance company, and let's say you do that for 10 years. That's $1,200 a year. That's $12,000 over the course of 10 years. Well, you didn't pay them $150,000. You only paid them $12,000. Your beneficiaries get the $150,000. So what did you buy? You bought money. It cost you $12,000 for the insurance company to assume the risk of you dying before the term is up. And in that situation, the insurance company lost. So you bought $150,000 for $12,000. It's buying money. We do it all the time. Loans, lines of credit, mortgages, we do it all the time. A house, you buy a house for $200,000. By the time you finish paying the mortgage, you pay $400,000. You bought money. And depending on what the product is and how long you had it, will depend on how much the money cost you. Now, you probably never thought about that, but that's the way it is. And so going back to this mindset, many of us, when we don't end up where we would like to end up in life, we blame lack of money for the problem. But really, that's not the problem. We didn't prioritize our money properly to give us an opportunity to be in a better position. And the example of that is when people make the decision between what they need and what they want, oftentimes what they need loses out unless it's just an absolute, I don't have a choice. Okay. I know so many situations where people don't have life insurance, but they have cable television, they have cell phones, they have Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, all these different things. They don't have any life insurance. When our priorities are in place, we understand that spending $150 a month for life insurance to make sure my families and my loved ones are taking care of an event that something happens to me is more important than spending $150 on a cell phone. When our priorities are not in proper perspective, we will do the opposite. Being prepared for tomorrow has to be more important than satisfying the pleasures of today. And that's not to say that we shouldn't enjoy life, but we have to have the ability to prioritize. And sometimes it requires saving. Sometimes it requires having patience and putting things off so that we can have the ability to do both, take care of the priorities and the needs, and enjoy some pleasures in life. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but there's got to be a balance. And that is one of the greatest struggles that we as human beings have. We don't have balance when it comes to needs versus wants. So I always tell people this when I do financial coaching and financial advisory work: lack of money is never the problem. Lack of money is never the problem. That's hard for people to accept and swallow, but lack of money is never the problem. When a person begins to have financial struggles, we need to ask questions. And we don't typically ask questions, so we assume that what's being said is true. But if a person is getting into financial difficulty, what are they doing with their problem? I mean, what are they doing with their money? Like, how did they get into this situation? Now, again, there's exceptions to every rule. But for the most part, people didn't put themselves in a position or didn't exercise patience to put themselves in a position to protect themselves against unexpected things. Let's talk about medical bankruptcy, okay? That's a big thing in this country. Well, medical bankruptcy is a byproduct of not having sufficient medical coverage in place. If you have significant medical coverage in place, you can avoid medical bankruptcy. I'm not saying that it won't cost you some money, but you can avoid medical bankruptcy. But people don't think that way. If a person's having problem paying their mortgage or their utilities or what have you, what happened? Well, did the person lose their job? Okay, well, let's evaluate this. How long were you on the job? 9 years. Over that 9-year period of time, did you build an emergency fund? Most people don't have an emergency fund. So they lose their job. They don't have income coming in for 4 or 5 months until they find a new job. They have to put everything on their credit cards, borrow money, do this and that, and they get into a hole. And they seemingly have difficulty getting out of that hole. Well, had you over that 9 years of working built an emergency fund that was equivalent to 6 months of your living expenses, when you were out of work for those 4 months, you would have been able to weather that storm and not been in a financial peril. But again, we don't think about these things. We don't ask these questions. Why? Because we focus on the adversity and we don't focus on the opportunities that we missed up to be prepared to protect us from these adversities. Okay. And then sometimes it's just people got bad spending habits. And those bad spending habits are compounded when adversity hits. So this is why I say lack of money is never the problem. See, here's my take on life. Money doesn't think. Money doesn't make decisions. Money does not give you advice or provide direction. Money is a resource. So yes, getting money may be a need to address a situation, but that's going to require critical thinking. It's going to require planning. It's going to require exercising some thought into how you put yourself in a better position or to create opportunities to enable you to have the financial resources to be able to make better decisions with. And if we don't get that, then we'll constantly be looking at money as the answer to our problems, when the reality is money is not the answer. Money is the resource that will help us once we figure out what the answer is. Because if I have a situation right now today with a tenant who admitted that they have bad spending habits, they've earned enough money to not be in the situation that they're in, but because they had bad spending habits, some adversity happened, and now they're in trouble. And what I said to them is the same thing that I'm saying to you now, which is this. If I give you the amount of money you need right now to solve this problem, I have not solved the problem. I have just temporarily eradicated the symptoms of the problem. The problem is still there. You're still a poor manager with your money. You're still making poor decisions. And so it's just a matter of time before you end up back in this situation again. And that's the reason why lottery winners and celebrities and people who come into big sums of money and then end up in financial troubles, that's the reason why that happens. Is because they never learned how to make wise decisions with their resources. And once they got into an adverse situation where now the money wasn't enough to keep them out of it, now money is the problem. No, money's not the problem. If we can get that, we can put ourselves in a much, much, much better position in life from a financial perspective. And so through sound advice and planning, our financial resources should be leveraged, and they should be enlisted to protect and preserve our quality of life. That, of course, also includes providing us with the ability to weather the uncontrollable risk of life and provide a stable financial future for ourselves and our loved ones. That's what money should be able to do. So, in closing, money is a resource. It's never the solution. And lack of money is, let me say it this way, money is seldom the solution. There may be some exceptions to the rule, but lack of money is never the problem. How we think about it, our perspective on it, and our ability to be effective managers of it make all of the difference in the world.
Well, we have time for a couple questions, and then we will let people have their day back today, but we will go ahead and ask if anyone would like to put more questions in the chat. We're happy to capture those, even if we don't have time to answer them, and we'll try to address that afterwards. One of the questions we got here was, is it a good idea to stop paying life insurance and switch to paying long-term care insurance once my children are living on their own? I work in long-term care and see a lot of the elderly who can't afford caregivers.
So that's a great question. And if there is no longer a need for life insurance, meaning you pass away, there are sufficient resources to address all of the final expenses and any other things that need to be addressed, then switching over to funding a long-term care strategy actually is a good idea, because long-term care is a very big issue and a very expensive issue. And there are different ways to address it. There are products that can address it. There's long-term care insurance. There are annuity products. There are even life insurance products that address it. So yes, that is a good idea. I obviously would sit down with a professional to help you to map out what's the best way to go about doing that.
We got to thank you and thanking you for your presentation. We also had another question here. You talked about behavior modification. What are some of maybe some tips as far as money habits go, and the idea of changing the mindset? What are some behavior modification tips that you might be able to give someone who's starting to change their mindset about money?
Yeah, so one of the things is absolutely have a budget. Okay, a budget that is clearly identifying what your obligated expenses are and what your non-obligated expenses are. Okay, because there are obligated expenses like a mortgage or rent, utilities, gas. Some of them are fixed and some of them are variable. So organizing your finances is extremely important. But then you have non-obligated expenses, and it's okay to have them, but you got to know what's non-obligated, because if you need to free up money to do things when you're looking at your priorities, then the first place that you're going to have to consider taking money from is the non-obligated expenses. So I know people who pay Bally's membership and they don't ever go to the gym. Well, and the only reason why they don't want to give it up is because they can't get the rate that they got it 10 years ago, and the rate is so low that if they get it later, they're gonna have to pay so much more. Yeah, but you don't ever go to the gym, so you're wasting money. That money could be redirected to a priority that's of a greater need, right? So getting organized is the first step, right? Once you get organized, you got to set goals, and then you got to prioritize those goals. And again, these are things that a financial professional can help a person with. And then that begins the process of reshaping your mindset as it relates to money and priorities.
Thank you. And I know that we're going to do some follow-up webinars specifically addressing some of these things. I had another question about insurance. It's a little bit off topic, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it so that we can take care of this individual. Can you talk a little bit about why someone would need term life versus universal life? Can you talk a little bit about the differences between the two and what they can do?
Okay, so there are two basic types of insurances: permanent and term. Now, there are various types of permanent insurance. Whole life is a type of permanent insurance. Universal life is a type of permanent insurance. Term is just basically term where there's a defined period of time where you will pay for that insurance. And then at the end of that term, it goes away. It doesn't accumulate any cash value. And typically, when a person is younger, they have children, and they have a greater need for the benefit of being able to take care of their family, pay off mortgage, and provide money for college and stuff like that. Term is more affordable, so you can get more coverage with term than you can with a permanent policy. A permanent policy is good to have because people don't know this, but 86% of the time, term policies expire. So the insurance company, 86% of the time, is collecting premiums for that term policy and never having to pay out the benefit. And so you got to understand what the purpose of these different policies are, and the situations that they best serve. A universal policy is one that ultimately accumulates cash value, but it's less expensive than a whole life policy. So depending on what the situation is and how much coverage a person needs, a universal policy may be more advantageous because it also can have long-term care benefits and things of that nature associated with it. And again, to get more deeper in detail, it's probably good to talk with a financial licensed insurance professional and or a financial professional like myself, or somebody who's local to your area.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for questions. And I want to thank you for being here. We did have one final question, which I will address in the outro here. But a couple of notes to our attendees. Look to your email for a link to the replay of this event, and that will be available on your email. You're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. I want to thank Will for being here and the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. One of the questions we received was, how do you find a financial specialist to help? Advice Chaser is one of the ways that you can do that. Here at Advice Chaser, our goal is to help you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. So all you have to do is go to advicechaser.com and click on the link to find an advisor. Again, it is a free service to you, and we'd be happy to help you out. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.